Today, I am going to be talking about the book How to Do Life by Traleg Rinpoche. And I am beginning now with the third section, which is titled Emotions. And the first chapter of that section is chapter 10, Emotions and Fixations. We all want to travel the path as we are Buddhists and reveal our ultimate nature, but we also want to be happy in our mundane lives. And sometimes it can seem that the spiritual and the mundane goals are at odds with each other, that either we're going to travel the path or we're going to be happy. And of course, that is not contradictory. If you feel that way, you don't understand them. These two goals are interrelated. When we improve in one area, we experience improvement in the other area. Happiness or unhappiness depends on what form our emotions take, and we can learn how to experience our emotions in a much healthier spiritual way. Quote, certain emotions will produce the experience of happiness and joy, and other forms will produce suffering, dissatisfaction, and pain. Now, our emotions are actually very complicated. We think that our emotions are pretty simple. I'm mad, I'm in love, I like this, I'm happy when this happens, and so forth. But actually, the way we relate to situations and the emotional landscape is very situational, that it's related to ourselves, our expectations, our interpretations, our past experience, and even facts. And that's an interesting word. Today is election day in the United States. And there are a lot of different facts out there that are contradictory to each other. I like the term alternate facts. The solution to that, of course, is to investigate, look very deeply and see past your biases and so forth. Then you get a better idea of what facts are. So one of my favorite examples about how our own interpretations, shall we say, flavor our experience as hot peppers. Tibetans like hot peppers. Whenever we have a Tibetan Lama here at the center, we always go out of our way to have a lot of hot peppers. And I know we had a Rinpoche here one time that he had his own plate. We always give them their own plate of hot peppers. And after eating them all, licked the plate. I think he wanted more. And me, I would be delighted to give every hot pepper that I own to somebody that wants to lick the plate. I do not see them as something that is tasty, delicious, and even edible. It's not the pepper, it's the person that's got it in their mouth that makes the difference. That kind of begs the question, if you're in a loving relationship, what is a loving relationship to you? And, this gets really complicated. These are two examples of how emotions get very, very complicated, and it depends very much on the person that's experiencing them, the situation, and all kinds of other things. And on top of that, it can change from situation to situation like that. In one situation, something that you like might make you happy. In another situation, it comes up and it might make you angry because you didn't want it to come up here. Maybe it's revealing something about you in this situation that you don't want to be revealed. For instance, you're gay, you have a gay partner, but at work, you've got this in the closet, so to speak, and then it comes out. All of a sudden, it's not such a good thing. It's things like this that make our lives so complicated, our emotions so complicated, our emotional responses. And this becomes something that we need to take a deep look at and understand the process. He says that meditation is not enough. It's not a matter of if our minds are just calm enough, no matter what arises, no problem. It's more complicated than that. We need insight as well as a calm mind. We have to understand our mind and why we react the way we do before we can really make progress in understanding our emotions. Our emotional life can be happy, it can be vibrant, or it could be the opposite. It could be full of stress, despair. We could feel overwhelmed by the emotions that arise during our daily life. Now, of course, we want to have a vibrant, happy emotional life as well as life in general. And therefore, we need to learn how to deal with our emotional life properly. Maybe deal is the wrong word, how to work with it in a successful way. If we can work with our emotional life more effectively, this leads to more contentment, greater meaning in life, and more fulfillment. Little by little, there is improvement. Little by little, things we notice get better. It still is going to be up and down, up and down, up and down. Mingyur Rinpoche says it's like the stock market, but at least you don't have these huge swings where one moment you're up elated, da 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 da, and then the next moment, boom, this is horrible. How did I get here? Yada, yada, yada. That it becomes much more stable. And big things you start seeing are really not that big. Instead of mountains, there's speed bumps, maybe even stepping stones. It's very important to maintain mindfulness the best that you can. And meditation is a great foundation for our minds becoming stable enough where we can examine what's going on in our minds and look at the process and see how all of this works. To see what happens when we engage in negative thinking, despair, bitterness, anger, self-condemnation, and so on and so forth. See what happens, where it goes. And then be aware that we really don't want to be in these places and that you want to learn how to avoid it. A favorite scene in a movie that I have seen, this scene is on YouTube, and it's where Dorothy and her friends, the Scarecrow, the Cowardly Lion, and the Tin Woodsman, come to the Wizard of Oz's castle, and they're asking for something, each of them. And they go in, and there on a wall is this projection of this huge face. And there is pipes with, you have these flames shooting up into the air and this booming voice, I am the wizard, da, 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 da. And they're all afraid and shaking. And Toto goes over to the curtain, pulls the curtain back. And there's this old man pulling levers, speaking into a microphone. And he turns around and sees them and he says, don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain. This is what is being conveyed here is, pay attention to the person behind the curtain that's causing you to have these emotional upheavals. Get to know what is going on. See beyond the smoke and mirrors. This is extremely important and it's extremely liberating. The more we know, the more freedom we have to choose. So pay attention, be mindful, be aware. And this helps us then go in a positive directions. To continue, our emotions manifest according to our assessment of ourselves and of others. That situations arise and we interpret, and then we respond on the basis of our interpretation, not on the basis of what's going on, but on the basis of what we think is going on. If we look at this deeper, he talks about there being two primary emotions, desire and anger, and that actually desire is behind anger. It might be a desire to get away, a desire for this unpleasant situation to end, or this unpleasant person to be gone, and so forth. He feels that we prioritize desire over anger, we being us humans. And from desire then comes jealousy, pride, indifference, and ignorance, greed, and then, of course, anger. On the other hand, there is positive desire, and this would include love, compassion, and the desire to have them, the desire to become enlightened. These are positive desires. And then there is negative desire, which I've already gone into. And the basis of that is this false conception of a self and other. And with that false conception of a self and then an other, all these other afflictive states arise. And interestingly enough, these other afflictive states aren't in their pure form. If it is pride, there could easily be an element of jealousy involved, or anger involved. Or we get angry, and it might be that there is an element of, let's say, pride. We get angry because maybe someone says something that pokes a hole in our pride. We can get angry at ourselves. We go to a dinner party, have a nice meal, and then later on go to the bathroom, look in the mirror, and you've got some spinach stuck between your teeth and you've been smiling all night long. Suddenly, your pride is gone and you're kind of angry at yourself, or why didn't he tell me, da, da, da. And that quickly, everything changes, so to speak. And all of this, of course, is based on how we want to present ourselves to other people and the feedback we get from people. So we filter everything through self, other, pleasant, unpleasant. How do I look to others? How are others responding to me? Are all kinds of expectations, a conceptual framework. Just to go over expectations, I have a list of 5 expectations I like to talk about because they're unreasonable, but there could be 500 if you thought about it. But the first is I'm the most important person in the room, and I take my room with me wherever I go. And it's a pretty big room, actually, if you think about it. The next is I should be respected, and other people need to earn my respect. The third is that other people should live up to my expectations. They should behave the way I expect them to behave. And in fact, if I'm in a close relationship, I shouldn't even have to tell my partner what my expectations are. He or she's supposed to know. I mean, they love me. Why should I have to tell them? The fourth is I should not be harmed in any way. I should not be stuck in a long line at the checkout counter at the store. Or how come I'm stuck in a traffic jam? This shouldn't have happened. Even though the reason why I'm in a traffic jam is that I wanted to drive during rush hour. And maybe I'm part of the traffic jam. And then the fifth one is my favorite. And that is life should be fair, and I'm the Supreme Court. And we take all of this with us, and it creates very complicated situations and very complicated relationships and emotional landscape. It's important to realize that all of this can change. We can change our mind, our attitudes, our expectations, our emotional responses, that we can improve, that this is not set in stone. We might think it's set in stone, but that's because we don't understand as well as we could. He then goes into discuss the difference between physical feelings and emotions. Physical feelings don't have a moral value attached to them, or you can't say good or bad about a physical feeling. But we can do that for emotions. So he goes back to the Sanskrit, that a physical feeling is described as Vedana in the Sanskrit, Vedana. And a negative emotion is klesha, Klesha. The kleshas have lots of values, judgments, and so forth attached to them The Vedana do not have these. It's just things like hot, cold, bright, dim, and so forth. It's just feelings that we have. This is painful. I've got a headache. And then, of course, on that, we pour on layers and layers of, I don't want a headache. This is painful, and so forth. In terms of the kleshas, they do not include love and compassion. They are positive emotions. Another word for klesha is poisons of the mind. They poison our mind with all kinds of negativity and all kinds of judgments that harm us, that keep us from experiencing happiness and cause us to engage in behavior that just accumulates more and more negative karma. The reason why we get caught up in these emotional upheavals is because of our internal mental structure. He goes on. On the other hand, we can become more and more aware of this, how it works, the mechanism, and as a result, we can change. And as we investigate more and more, we find that our emotions are, as he said, that is very complicated, and that we are very complicated beings. We can do investigation, you could call it insight meditation, and examine and look very closely at what's going on. I have a few favorite Chinese fortune cookie fortunes, and one that I received that fits right in here. This was at a restaurant. Simplicity of character is the result of profound thought. And I wasn't even a Buddhist at the time. This is what's being talked about here. Profound thought is actually examining, looking at what's going on, observing the mechanism, the emotional mechanism. We start to see that what we thought was pretty simple is very, very complicated. But the more we see how complicated it is, the simpler it becomes to work with, because we can see exactly where the problem is. At the present time, Kralik Rinpoche talks about us seeing emotions as simple and being a mechanical response. He did this, therefore I need to do that. He made me angry, so I had to vent on him. She was attractive, so I fell in love. I'm simplifying things somewhat, but this is how we can relate emotionally to other people and to ourselves. Quote here from the book, "It is much more complex than something happening to us and then reacting to it with relevant emotion," end quote. So our emotions manifest in very multifaceted and complex ways. And as I said earlier, he feels that we'll have more than one emotion arising at the same time. We can have love, anger, and jealousy all arising together. And it's amazing how the people that you love, you tend to get in arguments with. And then suddenly the love kind of gets weak and the argument and the anger flares up. The more we can see this, the better it is. It's not a linear mechanical process. There are causes that come from many different directions. We start seeing the complicated nature. On the other hand, we start seeing that there is a certain logic here that is going on that makes a lot of sense. We start developing some wisdom. He talks about two Western approaches to emotions. One is that they seem to be affiliated or associated with our neurological system, which is very materialistic. And he kind of says, no, that's not the answer. The other is that our emotions are a result of social conditioning and culture. He says that the Buddhist teachings are that there's a complex relationship between the subject and object. Many factors. He uses the term dharma. There are many different meanings of the word dharma. One is the teachings of the Buddha. Here it is a different definition. He has two phrases here, two different ones. One is the Dharma means various mental and physical factors. And another is that there are no simple entities, interdependence. that all of this arises. So he's just re-emphasizing this notion of it's very complicated. He says there's no such thing as a direct one-to-one relationship with self and other. It always involves much more than that. And he says we also frequently have a strategic element in our emotions. And that is that we can exaggerate our emotions to get more sympathy from other people, to get them to agree with us, to get whatever we want. I was married for 21 years, and I remember the silent treatment. Sometimes I would use it, sometimes she would use it. This is strategy. We can use our emotions. These are my own words here, but I kind of like it, to play with another's emotions. Again, it just keeps getting more and more complicated. If a person can control your emotions, they can control you, even if it's just for an instant. We also want to hide our emotions, and you could say put on a mask and show other emotions. And what came to mind with this was a painting, which I am going to bring up. That's a Rene Magritte painting. I think it's titled The Lovers. This is what he is getting at about we can use our emotions in many ways. One is to hide behind, use them for protection. So being aware of this complexity, it gives us an opportunity, and I'm stressing this, an opportunity to be more open to what is happening in the relationship, what's happening with our emotional landscape, the possibility, the opportunity of more clarity. He says that failing to see this complexity that leads to fixation and obsession. And again, the way I would describe this would be like a picture of a waterfall, or in filming, they call a freeze frame, where you have this video and then all of a sudden it stops on one frame and it doesn't move. This is what fixation does. It solidifies the flow. Of course, it makes things much easier to relate to, but you're relating to a fantasy. We focus on what gets our attention, good or bad. We focus on perhaps a bad quality of a particular person and we get angry. We focus on something that we like about another person and we ignore, at least temporarily, other parts of that person that actually we don't like and set us off. And of course, some people are just plain, or sometimes it's easy to point this out in other people, but sometimes we just we're in a negative mood and we just want to see what's wrong with other people. Why don't they da, 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 da? I think I should tell them what's wrong with them so they can improve. So all of this causes what Tralek Rinpoche says, disturbance in our mind. And it is this that leads to suffering. And we have to realize that things change. And that, again, fixating on things being a certain way, he describes this as like looking at a valley from the valley. And when we start breaking through the fixation, it's more like looking from a mountaintop down into the valley. So having a very broad perspective is really helpful. You might say make peace with and understand our emotional landscape. He says that all Buddhist practice is going towards this reducing our fixation and obsession. No matter what we're doing, it does have this effect, whether it be sitting meditation, deity practice, insight meditation, or whatever, that we can have a healthier approach to our emotions. And that's really the purpose of this third section, and that it's possible for us to change. The greater our understanding of our emotions, it leads to greater freedom from everything that is behind, you might say, the scenes that we are not all that aware of, where we're not aware of why our buttons are getting pushed and our strings being pulled. It's us that are pushing the buttons and pulling the strings. Wisdom develops from learning how to work with our fixations, and freedom comes from that wisdom. Happiness comes from this. This is a source of happiness. Our healthy emotions will grow. Our negativity shrinks. All kinds of negativity shrinks. And we begin to realize trying to maintain a calm mind isn't the solution. It's understanding the process, what it is, how it works. You could say making friends with this whole process. He then goes on to talk about detachment, because sometimes detachment is misunderstood. Frequently, actually, it's misunderstood. And he uses it to mean non-fixated. It doesn't mean to avoid, to become cold, to ignore. It means not getting caught up in emotional upheavals, to experience them and not get caught up, not again going to the freeze frame. Let it flow, let it rise, and then let it last for a while, and then it'll naturally subside. Meditation is trying to recognize and overcome fixation, and by letting this happen and then investigating it when you're not meditating on the cushion, wisdom develops and the whole process becomes clear, and you can watch without getting too much involvement or fixation. So to summarize here, our emotions are very complex. We've got interdependence here. So lots and lots of different factors go into determining our emotional response to life and the different experiences and people. They're very subjective from our side. And our relationships are very subjective. But this is workable, and there are methods we can use to work with it and travel towards the goal of Buddhism, which is complete enlightenment. And we can be happy on the path as we travel the path. We don't have to sacrifice our happiness. So greater understanding of what is going on inside is essential if we're going to change. Mindfulness, awareness, insight, and investigation are crucial. You cannot travel the path without these. And he pointed this out already, but there is a difference between an emotion and a fixation. An emotion is fluid, whether it be love, compassion, or even anger. It's fluid, and we can just let it pass. And fixation freezes it, and then we're stuck with it. He uses fear as an example. If you fixate on fear, you become paranoid. If you let it go, you experience it, and then it's gone. He then talks about, in this last part of this chapter, the term samskara. And he defines that as psychophysical dispositions, quote, gathering of various psychophysical factors brought together because of fixation. What this means is psychophysical is mental and physical, feelings and our judgments of the feelings, our emotions of the feelings. And so these samskaras are, you could say, a collection of habitual patterns and mental conditioning. And the stronger the fixation, the stronger the samskara becomes. The more our mind gets conditioned to seeing things in a certain way, and it becomes more of the same old, same old, same old. I posted on my Facebook page a story about a wise old dog and a young pup. The wise old dog was lying on the floor of a human being's house. I took a picture of a dog lying on the floor with a fireplace in the background. It looked very cozy. And I said the wise old dog was lying on the floor, contented. In the same room was a young pup running in circles, chasing his tail. And finally, the wise dog raises his head and asks him, "Why are you chasing your tail?" And the young pup says, "Well, I'm trying to be happy, and I hear happiness is the end of my tail. And the wise dog says, well, yes, happiness is that close, but if you leave it alone, it follows you wherever you go. And then one person commented that their dog would run in circles in a clockwise direction and then pause, look like he was thinking about it, and then circle in the other direction. And I'm thinking, boy, this sounds like a lot of humans. You know, we think we're going to do something different, so we change directions and do the same thing. And nothing has changed. We need to be aware of these predispositions, these habitual patterns, how we have conditioned our mind to look at things, and realize that this is just our own creation and that we can get out of these habitual patterns. We don't want to be a collection of our samskaras. We studied Pema Chodron's book. I believe it was The Places That Scare You. And in there, she talked about if you get into a situation where it seems like you're in the same place that you were before, over and over and over again, the solution is do something different, anything different. Just do something different. And that's what is being expressed here, that if you don't do something different, even if it's something little, you're not going anywhere. You're going in circles. At the end of this chapter, he quotes Martin Heidegger, quote, well, he doesn't quote Martin Heidegger in this quote, but he's kind of summarizing what he read by Martin Heidegger. Quote, selflessness does not mean there is no self, but rather no free-floating self that is not in relationship with others or the external world. Now I'll open it up to questions. The question starts with a statement, and that is that this also sounds so good, so reasonable, but how do you keep it in your mind during the day? This is a tip, you might say, that I got from a non-Buddhist source, and it is to pay attention to your mood level. How are you feeling? If you want to, you could say your emotional level. You know, am I angry? Am I desirous? Am I feeling greedy? You know, but pay attention to what's going on in terms of the way you are feeling. And then if you are happy, no problem. If you're not happy, if you're having a bad mood or whatever, then stop, take a time out, and look within. I like the example of a maintenance required light on the dashboard of your car. This is a clue that maintenance needs to be performed. And you don't have to call up your Ford dealer for this maintenance. Just take a break and look, what thoughts am I having right now? What thoughts have I been having in the last few minutes? And then, of course, if you find negative thoughts, let go of them. Why am I holding on to this? It's making me feel bad. The question is, how do you deal with a person that is untruthful to you, and when you talk to them about it, they won't admit it? The way to deal with this is realize that it's your problem, not their problem, and it's how you relate to them. And it might be as simple as, well, now I know they're untruthful. I can't trust what they tell me. And then base the relationship on that. It may be lots of different directions to go when you come to this conclusion, but the common reaction in samsara is that we think that we are right, the other person is wrong, and we're going to change their analogy. It's like pushing a chain uphill. Most of us do not have the skill to really change another person's mind, and we get frustrated and then we get angry. So part of it is accepting the other person, but then not ignoring this, but basing the relationship on this bit of information and deciding where you want the relationship to go in terms of your input.